Tequila Sunset. The fog rolled over the lake, thick and heavy, blanketing everything in a dense grey mist. Darren and Michael sat in the small rowing boat, their breath visible in the cold night air. The water was deathly still, disturbed only by the gentle lap of the oars cutting through the glassy surface. They'd taken the small boat from an old abandoned jetty back on the shore, its owner long gone, leaving it an easy target if you knew where to look. The two friends had stumbled upon the long-forgotten shack and rotting jetty a few years ago, when hiking in the area, as they did most weekends and school breaks. They had never shared their secret treasure with their parents or friends. This was their special place, hidden from all but them. They had centered many adventures during their early teens around the old shack and decaying jetty. Despite the fact that the small rowing boat should have been condemned and scrapped many years before they found it, they regularly ventured out onto Lake Superior and had learned what time of evening and the best weather conditions in which to venture out onto the mist-covered waters to fish or swap scary, gruesome tales of horror. Darren squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the shore they'd left behind, but the fog had swallowed it whole.
"Damn, you can't see a thing out here,"
he muttered, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Michael, sitting across from him, nodded absently. His mind was elsewhere, focused on the weighty decision that had brought them out here tonight. He was tense, his fingers drumming against his knee, but Darren didn't notice. He never did. Darren was the kind of guy who never noticed anything unless it was about him.
"This was a good idea, man,"
Darren continued, leaning back and letting the oars rest on the water.
"Just like old times, huh? Remember when we used to camp out in the old shack? Telling our parents that we were sleeping over at each other's. Those were the days. Man, I used to shit myself worrying that our folks would find out the truth and start to check our every move. But you, man, you were so cool. You were always a good liar and could mask your emotions so well, dude."
Michael forced a smile, his heart pounding in his chest.
"Yeah, good times,"
he echoed, though the words felt hollow. Every memory of those nights was tainted now, twisted by the thoughts that had consumed him for weeks.
"You've been quiet lately,"
Darren said, raising an eyebrow.
"Everything okay?"
"Yeah, just thinking."
Michael replied, his voice strained. He stared at Darren, watching his carefree grin, his easy confidence. Darren had always been like that, unflappable, untouchable. It grated on Michael, that smug sense of invincibility.
"Thinking about what?"
Darren pressed.
"Come on, man, spit it out. I can see something's eating at you."
Michael's fingers tightened around the oar, his knuckles whitening.
"Just stuff. Life. You know how it is."
Darren laughed, a loud, carefree sound that echoed over the lake.
"Man, you've always been such a worrier. You need to loosen up, live a little. Look at me. I don't let anything get to me. That's how you gotta be."
Michael's stomach churned. That's how it always was with Darren, always so damn sure of himself, so sure that everyone else's world revolved around his own. And now he had Sarah. Sweet, beautiful Sarah, who had been Michael's friend first, his crush first. But Darren had swept in and taken her too, just like he took everything else. Oh, virginal Sarah. So sweet, so pure. She should have been his. But as usual, Darren worked his sickly, vile magic and lured her to his bed. They didn't care that he could hear them in the next room fornicating, sighs and laughter of pleasure. Pleasure that should have been shared between him and Sarah. Instead, he would listen through the wall and masturbate himself into exhaustion, as he would hear their excited giggles as they came together in unison.
"What's it like, Darren?"
Michael asked suddenly, his voice low and sharp. Darren looked confused.
"What's what like?"
"To have everything. To just take whatever you want, whenever you want it."
Michael said, his eyes boring into Darren's.
"Must be nice, right? To always be the winner. To always get the girl."
Darren frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face.
"What the hell are you talking about, Mike? Where's this coming from?"
Michael's heart was pounding in his ears, his anger bubbling to the surface.
"You know damn well what I'm talking about. You've always done it since we were kids. You always had to be the best, always had to have everything. And now you've got Sarah, too."
Darren's eyes narrowed.
"Sarah? Is that what this is about? Jesus, Mike. I didn't know you were still hung up on her. You never made a move, man. How was I supposed to know?"
Michael's hand gripped the oar so tightly his fingers ached.
"It's not about making a move, Darren. It's about you never giving a shit about what anyone else wants. It's about you always taking what's mine.
Darren stared at him, incredulous.
What the hell are you talking about? You're acting like a goddamn psycho right now. I'm your best friend, Mike. We've been through everything together.
Yeah, we have.
Michael said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper.
But maybe that was a mistake.
Darren snorted, shaking his head.
This is crazy, man. You're not making any sense. What? You brought me out here to bitch about Sarah? You could have done that back on the shore.
Michael's eyes darkened.
No, Darren. I brought you out here for something else.
Before Darren could react, Michael swung the oar with all his strength, cracking it across Darren's face. The sound was sickening, a dull thud of wood meeting bone. Darren's head snapped back, blood spurting from his nose, and he fell sideways, nearly toppling out of the boat.
What the fuck?
Darren screamed, clutching his face, blood streaming through his fingers.
What the hell is wrong with you?
Michael didn't answer. He swung again, harder this time, catching Darren on the side of the head. Darren let out a strangled cry, trying to shield himself with his arms, but Michael was relentless. He hit him again and again, each blow fueled by years of pent-up resentment, each strike landing with a sickening crunch.
You think you can just take everything from me?
Michael shouted, his voice hoarse with rage.
You think you can just have whatever you want and fuck everyone else?
Darren's attempts to defend himself grew weaker with each hit, his cries turning into pained moans. Blood poured from his wounds, mixing with the lake water sloshing in the bottom of the boat. His face was a mess of cuts and bruises, his eyes wide with terror and confusion.
Mike, please.
Darren begged, spitting blood.
Stop. I'm sorry.
Michael ignored him. He grabbed the rope he'd hidden under the seat, the rope he'd brought specifically for this moment. He looped it around Darren's ankles, yanking it tight, ignoring his friend's feeble struggles.
Mike, what are you doing?
Darren whimpered, his voice barely a whisper.
Please, don't.
You took everything from me, Darren.
Michael snarled, tying the rope in a vicious knot.
Now I'm taking something from you.
He reached under the seat, pulling out the heavy rock he'd brought, the anchor that would drag Darren to the bottom of the lake. Darren's eyes widened in horror, and he tried to kick out, but he was too weak, too broken.
Mike, no, please don't do this.
Darren screamed, but his voice was lost in the fog, swallowed by the night. Michael didn't hesitate. He heaved the rock over the side of the boat, the rope pulling tight around Darren's legs. Darren's body jerked, his screams turning to gurgles as he was yanked overboard, disappearing into the black water with a splash. For a moment, everything was silent. Michael stood there, panting, staring at the spot where Darren had vanished. His heart was racing, his body trembling with adrenaline. He had done it. Darren was gone. And now, Sarah would be his. She would see what a monster Darren was, how he had deserved this. She would understand. The fog closed in around Michael like a suffocating blanket, the silence of the lake swallowing every sound. Darren's screams had faded into the night, replaced by the dull roar of Michael's blood pounding in his ears. He stood in the boat, chest heaving, watching the water ripple where Darren had disappeared, swallowed by the black depths. He could hardly believe it was over. The boat rocked gently beneath him, its wooden frame creaking as if the lake itself was groaning in disapproval. Michael dropped to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him, but not with guilt or fear. No, this was something else entirely, something dark and exhilarating. Michael's heart raced with a mix of adrenaline and triumph. He had done it. He had actually done it. Darren was gone, the arrogant, cocky bastard who had taken everything from him, who had flaunted his happiness, his life, his love with Sarah. But now, Darren was nothing but a bloated corpse sinking to the bottom of the lake, and Michael was finally free. A wild grin spread across Michael's face, and he let out a breathless laugh, the sound sharp and harsh in the stillness. He felt light, almost giddy, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The fog swirled around him, cool and damp on his skin, but inside he was burning, a fire of triumph and anticipation roaring in his chest. Sarah. He thought of her, back at the cabin, probably wondering where they were, waiting for them to come back. But now, it would just be him. Just Michael. And she would see him for who he really was. The man who was willing to do whatever it took to be with her, to make her happy. The man who loved her more than anything.
Sarah,
Michael whispered, the name a promise on his lips. He imagined her face, her beautiful, perfect face, her eyes wide with surprise when he told her what had happened. How Darren had slipped, how he had tried to save him, but it was too late. She would cry and he would hold her, comfort her. And then, Sarah, Michael whispered, the name a promise on his lips. He imagined her face, her beautiful, perfect face, her eyes wide with surprise when he told her what had happened. How Darren had slipped, how he had tried to save him, but it was too late. She would cry and he would hold her, comfort her. And then, the thought of what came next made him hard. He'd fuck her, just like he had in his dreams, in all those fantasies where he had imagined taking her, owning her. She would want it, he knew she would. He could see it in the way she looked at him sometimes, when Darren wasn't around. She'd bite her lip, her eyes flicking to his, a secret smouldering fire hidden behind her gaze. She was waiting for this, waiting for him. Michael grabbed the oars and began to row, each pull sending a jolt of energy through his muscles. The boat cut through the water, slicing through the fog like a knife. He could see the shore in the distance, a dark line against the mist, and his pulse quickened. He was so close now, so close to everything he had ever wanted. His mind raced with visions of what was to come. He would get back to the cabin and she would be there, waiting for him. He'd tell her about Darren, about how it was an accident, how he had tried to save him but couldn't. She'd believe him. Why wouldn't she? They were friends, after all. She'd trust him. And then, he'd take her. He'd take her like he had always dreamed, with all the pent-up desire and frustration that had been building inside him for years. She'd feel it too. He was sure of it. She'd want him, need him, just as much as he needed her. Michael's breath came faster, his excitement building with every stroke of the oars. He could see it all so clearly now, the way she'd look at him, her lips parting in surprise, her breath catching in her throat. The way her body would respond, the way she'd melt under his touch, her moans echoing in the night as he claimed her, made her his. And then, they'd pack up and leave. They'd drive south, down to Mexico, away from all of this, away from the memories and the past. They'd start fresh, build a new life together. A life where they could be free, where no one would judge them or question what had happened. They'd live on the beach, drink tequila, and make love under the stars.
Just you and me, Sarah.
Michael murmured, his voice lost in the fog.
Just you and me, forever.
Tequila Sunset.